Hi guys, welcome back to the Curly Reader. So today I thought I'd share with you some of my favorite non-World War II historical fiction books. These are all books that I've read and loved and think everybody should read them. So let's go ahead and get started. The first book that I wanted to share with you today is The Kitchen House by Kathleen Grissom. This follows our main character, Lavinia, who is originally from Ireland, and in her journey from Ireland to the United States, her parents both died on the ship. And so in order to pay off her fare or her passage, she becomes an indentured servant to a plantation owner from the South. And so she goes to live on a plantation with slaves. She lives in the kitchen house with the slaves and is basically a slave herself. And so she becomes like family with them. It is a story about her as she goes from living in the kitchen house with the slaves to living in the big house and becoming a servant there, and just kind of all the things that she faces along the way. It's a fantastic book. I read it a few years ago, listened to the audiobook, and I flew through it. It was one that I just could not stop listening to. I thought it was fantastic. I highly recommend it. So the next book that I wanted to share with you is The Red Tent by Anita Diamant. And this is the story of Dinah from the Bible, so it's biblical fiction. Dinah, there's a very little about Dinah in the Bible, and Anita Diamant really makes it into a whole story, and it's just fascinating. It follows Dinah, who is the daughter of one of Jacob's daughters, and just kind of her journey through womanhood during that time, what it meant to be a woman, how they kind of still had a lot of their old beliefs, even though her father was, followed God. And it was just so fascinating to me. Even if you're not a Bible believer, I think that you would really like this book because there was a lot of depth to it. There was a lot to do with women and their role during that time in history. And just there's a lot of things that she faced that were misconstrued, and I thought that Anita Diamant's take on it all was just fascinating, and I really love this. This was also made into a mini-series on AMC, maybe? I think that might have been the channel it was on. It was years ago, but when I got done reading the book, I ended up getting the DVDs from the library and watching it, and I thought it was really done really well as well. And so this was absolutely fantastic, and I think that, like I said, even if you're not Christian or you don't read the Bible and you don't know who these people are, you would still really enjoy it because it's so fascinating what these women went through during that time. It was really, really good. All right, the next book that I wanted to recommend is The 19th Wife by David Ebershoff. This is one that I've shared on my channel before, but I absolutely love it, and I could not leave it off this list. This book is told in a dual timeline. So part of the timeline is during modern times, but part of the timeline is told in the 1800s, and it follows the beginning of the Mormon Church. So from when they were in Nauvoo, Illinois, and what made them progress out west and their journey out there. And then it's told from the perspective of Anna Liza Young, who was Brigham Young's 19th wife. And Brigham Young was one of the leading founders of the Mormon Church. And so she was his 19th wife, and she famously left the church and spoke out against polygamy and actually worked with the government to make polygamy illegal in the United States. And so I just thought that this was fascinating. It is a biased take on the founding of the Mormon Church because it is based off of Anna Liza Young's own personal writings. And so I just thought it was really interesting to learn about a very personal experience with that church and the founding of it and the pros and cons of it and all of that. And then the part that is told in modern time is from the point of view of a polygamous sect. One of the 19th wives in a polygamous sect her son. And so it just kind of follows that. But the historical fiction part of it to me was the part that I loved, and I just thought it was really well done and really captured my interest, and I learned a ton reading this book. So I think you should definitely pick it up. The next book that I want to recommend isn't necessarily a book, more so an author that writes historical fiction that I recommend, and that's Philippa Gregory. She writes a lot of like Tudor history and Old English history. Probably her most famous book is The Other Bullion Girl. That was made into a movie years ago, but that follows Tudor Henry VIII's second wife. So just kind of her, and she was eventually beheaded, that's no secret, but it just kind of follows her rise and then fall from power and all the backstory behind of it. And it was I really enjoyed that one. I read that years and years ago. But she also has like The White Queen and The White Princess. Those are currently being made into Starz shows, TV shows. So she has those books that have come out. She does, like I said, all of the Tudor queens she has written books about, and they are so well done. She does her research, she knows what she's talking about, and they are just, I love her writing style. So if you're looking for kind of a broader, like an author to kind of key on, she's definitely one that you should check out. All right, the next book that I wanted to talk about is Necessary Lies by Diane Chamberlain. This is set in the 1960s in North Carolina, and it's a dual perspective. So it follows Ivy, who is a 15-year-old girl who her parents have died. She lives with her grandmother. Her grandmother has diabetes. Her sister has some sort of mental illness or mental handicap, and so she's kind of dealing with taking care of both of them. Her sister has a baby, and so she's helping with that. They're a low-income family. They live on a farm out in the boonies in North Carolina in the 1960s. So you get her perspective, and then you also get another character, Jane's perspective. Jane is a social worker, and so she kind of comes into contact with Ivy through work, and the whole book kind of follows the eugenics movement that was still going on in North Carolina in the 1960s. North Carolina was one of the last states to do away with eugenics, and so this was very, very interesting to me because it follows Jane and her like moral dilemma, because she has the responsibility of recommending sterilization for people. And so is she going to recommend that they get sterilized or not? And sometimes they're minors and sometimes they're not, and what qualifies somebody to need to be sterilized and what doesn't. And it was a whole thing. And it was like a slap in the face to me, because like I knew that this stuff happened, but to get like that perspective of it was just, wow. It was very intense, and I really enjoyed this book. I like that you got both perspectives in it. I think that this book would be a phenomenal book club book, because there's so much good discussion that could come out of this book, because there's so much moral gray area involved in that whole discussion. And so it was just really, really awesome, and I loved it, and I hope everybody reads this, because I think that there's so much discussion to be had on this topic, and it is just fascinating to me personally, in my opinion. So that is definitely one I think you should check out. After that, I want to recommend Before We Were Yours by Lisa Windgate. And a lot of people have heard about this because it's been fairly popular. But Before We Were Yours follows the Tennessee Children's Home Society and its, founder, Georgia Tann. This is set back in 1939 in Memphis, Tennessee, and it's dual timeline also. So there's like a present day perspective, and then you get the 1939 perspective. And the 1939 perspective follows a little 12-year-old girl, Rill, who her family, her mom goes into labor. They live on the river. Okay, let me start over. So they live on the river, on a riverboat. with her parents. Her and her siblings do. And her mom is in labor one night, and things kind of go ugly. And so her dad has to take her mom to the hospital. And while they're gone, people show up saying, you know, telling Rill and her siblings, like, hey, we're here to take you to your parents. And they don't take them to their parents. We'll just say that. So it follows her whole story. The whole story follows, like I said, Georgia Tann and the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And basically what this lady did was she would go down to the river, or she would go to people's backyards or wherever, and she would kidnap kids and then sell them to the elite who were looking to adopt kids. And a lot of times these people the elite had no idea that this had happened. They just wanted to adopt a child, and here was a child that needed them, and so they adopted them. And it was horrific. A lot of these kids died because she wasn't taking care of them properly, and it was just, oh my goodness. Eleanor Roosevelt like heralded her as being the, you know, pioneer for adoption in the United States. And then decades later, it all came to light what actually happened, you know, like as she was dying, or, you know, after she had already died or something. I don't even remember. But this lady basically never had to face the consequences of what had happened or what she had done. And it was horrific, but such a good book. And I just found out yesterday that Lisa Windgate is writing a nonfiction book that's going to be released later this year. That's all like stories of survivors of this whole ordeal. And it was just fascinating. It's like one of those little obscure pieces of history that most people have never heard of, but it was so good. Highly suggest it. It was really good on audiobook too. So if you're looking for a good audiobook, this would be a good one to check out. All right, the next one that I want to recommend is The Gown, a novel of the royal wedding, and this is by Jennifer Robson. And this was a book, it's set after World War II, but it is a book about Queen Elizabeth and her wedding, and it follows two embroiderers, Anne and Miriam, who are commissioned to work on the royal wedding dress, and it's all very hush-hush. It's right after the war, and so you kind of have some of the fallout from the war and what the effect it's had on the nation, but it just follows these two women and how they're surviving after the war, but also kind of ties in the royal aspect of it, which was a lot of fun. This one's also dual timeline, so you get like a present day and a past perspective, but it was just a really nice read. It was very quick, just very fun. If you like the show The Crown, this is a definite you must read, because it follows Queen Elizabeth and her wedding, and it was very romantic, and I loved it. I love this book. And so, like I said, very quick read, but definitely worth the read. All right, the next one that I want to recommend is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. Now this one I debated putting on this list because this was not my personal like favorite book ever, but I did enjoy it, and I definitely see its merit as a book and its importance as a book, and I did enjoy the reading experience as a whole. So The Heart's Invisible Furies follows our main character Cyril Avery from his conception to his death. So this is you get the whole lifetime of this person. Cyril was born in the 1940s in Ireland, and he was gay, or is gay, was gay, I don't know, whatever. So he was born, he's gay, he's 1940s in Ireland, and the Irish were not kind to homosexuals during this time. And he faced a lot of really harsh discrimination, and so it just kind of follows him through that. He eventually moves to Amsterdam and then to the United States, but it goes through like all different phases of him coming to the realization that he's gay, and then accepting that, and he was adopted, and so you have a lot of the, you know, adoptive parent stuff going on. It goes through the AIDS epidemic in New York. When he was living in New York was when that was going on, and so you do touch on that, and then it goes all the way until his death. And it was very eye-opening. A lot of what he went through, I didn't really understand that that's how things were. It made me realize how far we've come in society as far as acceptance, and how much further we still have to go. It, as a Christian, I kind of struggled with this a little bit because in Ireland at the time, it was very Catholic, very, very Catholic, and they were pretty much like you would be jailed for this or beat to death by your peers if they found out that you were homosexual at the time. And so it was heartbreaking to me knowing that that's how Christians were acting at this time with something that they didn't agree with, and that they didn't understand that showing God's love was not the proper way to do it. And it was heartbreaking for me. And so that's kind of where I come from with the like how far we've come, but there's still people out there like that, and it's heartbreaking. And I don't know, I had a lot of feelings about this book personally, and it really challenged me in some areas as well, which I appreciated. I do appreciate that in a book when it can challenge me and really make me question my own actions on things. And so it's one that I definitely appreciate for what it was, and I recommend it to people to read because I think it's important that to expand and to really understand the struggles that some people go through that you may not be familiar with. And so yeah, like I said, it wasn't like one of my all-time favorites. I know for a lot of people it's like 5 stars and beyond. It was not that for me, but it was very eye-opening and very good, and it's one that I still think about quite a bit. And so for that reason, I put it on this list because I think it's important, and I think it's important for people to read it. So anyway, check that one out for sure. And then the last book that I wanted to mention today, it's a middle grade book, and I could not complete a historical fiction recommendations list without adding this one to it. This was probably one of my favorite books that I read during March this year, and that is Until Tomorrow, Mr. Marsworth, and this is by Sheila OConnor. So this book is set during the Vietnam War, and it is an epistolary book, so it's written all in letters, and it follows our main character, Renee, who writes back and forth. She has a paper route, and she writes back and forth to one of her customers, or is that what you call somebody you deliver papers to? I don't even know. Anyway, so she writes back and forth to him, and he's an elderly gentleman, and she writes to him about how she is scared that her brother's going to be drafted, and she doesn't want her brother to be drafted, and her brother doesn't want to be drafted. And because of the time that they were in, it just really hits on how people perceive that, and they would call you a traitor, or whatever, because you didn't want to fight in the war. And people did not look on that very kindly. It deals with bullying and how to confront that. It was so good. This book, not many books make me cry. This book made me sob. It was so touching and so beautiful, and I wish more people had heard about this book. It's one that I came across randomly. Somebody on my Instagram feed had read it and recommended it, and so I picked it up right away, and I am forever grateful that I did, because this book was just so much for me. It was like the book I needed at the time, but it also is so beautifully written and touches on so many really good topics, and it really hones in on how war affects children and how it, impacts them and their fears and their concerns about war. And so it was, I love this book. Go read it, please. More people need to read it, so I have more people to talk with about it. And yeah, go read it. So, all right. So those are all of my non-World War II historical fiction recommendations. I hope that you found some new books to check out in this video. And, if you have read some of these, I would love to chat with you about them. I obviously have feelings about all of these books. And so I would love to chat with you guys about these. So if you have read any of these, please leave comments down below, and I would definitely, like I said, love to hear from you about them. But I hope that if you haven't read some of these, that you check some of them out, because they're all great reads. So I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that you stick around and subscribe, and until next time, see ya.